Wow. Okay, well, everybody, welcome America, welcome the world to Sweden. Welcome to the Neo4j offices here in Malmö, Sweden. I'm sitting with Emil Eifrem, the CEO and founder of Neo4j. And in the next 20 minutes, we've got some time for you to ask this man some questions where he will provide answers. Some of you have already provided some questions in the poll that we have running on the platform right now. And to help you figure out how to do that while we're getting going here, I'm going to switch to the slides. But first, Emil, do you want to say hi to the people?
Hi, fantastic. Great to be able to join you all. I've been trying frantically to check out the sessions and be on Hopin. It's super high quality so far, so excited to be here.
It's been absolutely an amazing day, so can't wait to get into these questions. I think this will be fun, a good way to wrap up the first session. Okay, so first we're going to hop into some slides, if that's okay, and take you through what we're about to do. It's a simple Q&A with Emil, and here's how it's going to work. First of all, that's Emil. Hi, he's Emil. And hi, I'm Andreas.
And what do we usually call you?
And for those of you in the know, you call me ABK. You can still just call him Emil.
Yes.
Okay. If you want to participate, if you've got some questions you want to ask for Emil, please go to the tab that you see here. First, go to the reception tab on the left, and then on the right, you'll end up seeing a tab next to polls, people. You'll see Ask Emil. Click on that, and then just type in your question, or please upvote any of the questions that you see there that you think are worth asking. We've got 20 minutes to run through them. We'll see how many we get through, but please, the more participation, the better, okay? That's it. That's all I've got for slides. Now back to live. And all right, so this has been a huge day. There's been a huge amount of material. I love some of the questions that have already come up, and I'm going to just switch over to the what we've got coming up here at the top already. And this is interesting. This really gets to what are graphs all about, and what are graphs? What is the potential of graphs in a way? So this first question that's been uploaded really well is, what is a domain you think is ripe for leveraging graph technology, but has been slow to adopt?
Yeah, such an interesting question. So by kind of way of background, I'm one of the co-founders of the company. We started the company in 2007, right? And we've been working on the technology forever. Initially, I was one of the 2 kernel developers, right? And then I did all of the API design for a while, and then I did all of the documentation and the unit. I progressively flowed kind of out and out in the outer rings of the architecture, right? And then after a while, the job became kind of less building the product and more building the organization that built the product, type of a thing. And keep me honest here, in 2010, we grew the team from like 5 to 10, and that's when you joined.
That's right.
Is that right? Summer of 2010.
I was employee 10. That's
employee
right.
10.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect. So that's just a little bit of background, just to give context on who I am and who ABK is. And we've certainly seen waves of graph adoption in a lot of industries over the years. And for the longest time in the early days, my big kind of conundrum was the financial services industry. Financial services typically tends to be early to adopt technology. They spend a lot of technology if it can kind of move their top or bottom line forward. I felt that there was so much relationships in their data that was very valuable, right? I'm sure you did the same, right? But for some reason, it just didn't catch on. It took like years and years and years, and the use cases were so clear. It was so crisp,
easy to explain. It was like whiteboardy.
It was all there,
things.
but something just held it back. And I think it was some combination of just inertia, like a lot of even developers in financial services I've observed, like tend to move between financial services companies, right? Maybe not outside of it. So there's maybe some of that, right? And then I think there's also a huge amount of stuff around security, right? Which of course, like in the early days, where this embedded Java library and all that kind of stuff, right? And then boom, like that. Don't even remember what years, maybe 14, 15, 16, something like that. It just started taking off, right? And all of a sudden, now, today, financial services is the biggest vertical for graph adoption on the planet, right? And so that's just one example. And so we've certainly seen that play out many times. Right now, what would be a domain? Probably the one that comes to mind, and this is colored, of course, by kind of current events, would be utilities, right? Because so we're here in Malmö, Sweden, which is in Europe, and energy crisis and war in Ukraine, all that kind of stuff, right? And you look at analyzing and figuring out, like, basically, let's call it a big power grid, right? That's exactly a graph model, right? And you think about that use case, it's exactly the same one that has a lot of deep adoption in telcos, right? It's the same, right? As with a telco network, a utility network or a telco network. It's exactly the same thing. But I've not seen that adopted. We certainly have seen some, right? Kind of big energy companies, but nowhere near as much as I would imagine, considering the technical fit. And then also just considering how impactful that is on the world today. So that would be a number one domain in my mind.
Okay. So if there's anybody out there listening from the energy sector,
go ahead, adopt, use it.
Call us. It's a great fit according to Emil. I think you're absolutely right. That makes great sense to me. Something we should look into. Let's look at another question here, and this is going back to the history. Actually, this is going back to the founding of Neo4j as an open source project first. This question from David Allen, and he asks, new folks might not know the history and the name Neo4j. Can you talk a little bit about the name? Who is this J guy? And why does he get his own entire graph database?
Neo4j.
Why is it?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Congratulations, Jay.
Yeah, Jay did well. There's a short version of this story, there's a medium version of this story, and then there's a really long over beers version of this story. Sadly, this is water, so I'll stick to the short to medium version of it all, right? So when we initially conceived of the idea, way back in the days when dinosaurs ruled the earth, years and years ago now, right? We called it Project Neo. And Project Neo, because Neo in Latin means new, and this was a new way of looking at data, right? And so that was kind of one reason for it. The other reason, of course, was that we were back then and remain today massive fans of the Matrix movies, right? And of course, Keanu Reeves in the Matrix movies is Neo, and he's fighting against the Matrix, and the Matrix, you could argue, is a table, right? And so we figured Neo is a great one. Also, we immediately came up with a recursive acronym for it. Neo stands for the Neo engine, of course. The Neo engine, of course. Right? And Neo stands for the Neo. So it's a recursive acronym, which we felt very happy about, and that kind of stuff, right? So we call it Project Neo. And then fast forward a few years, and we wanted to commercialize it, right? And then we go out and we, of course, try to get neo.com. And of course, neo.com was mind-numbingly expensive because it was all of $2,000. Right? Which, of course, by today's standard, that's not a lot of money, right? But it was like, I don't know, $1,900 more than we had at the time, or something like that, right? And then Peter Neubauer, there's three co-founders of Neo4j. Peter, he was very deep in the Java community at the time, and there's like this common pattern where people said, "Hey, I'm going to build a logging framework for what? For Java. I'm going to call it log4j, right?" And so then Peter said, "Hey, let's just use Neo4j." And it kind of doesn't make sense. What do you mean, like log for Java? That makes sense. It's a logging framework for Java, right? Or for JVM. Neo for Java doesn't really make sense, but the domain was $9.
Sold.
So,
pretty fantastic SEO, right?
And then we had that thing, which is always for the longest time, kind of the early grassroots adoption of Neo4j, which has always been core to us,
Mhm.
right? And this event is a great example of the long arc of that, right? For the longest time, anyone who mentioned Neo4j on Twitter, we saw.
Right.
We tweeted them, we engaged them, we said,
Never
hey,
got
how's it
confused
going?
with any other product. It was very differentiated.
No one else
yes.
called their product Neo4j for some reason.
Right.
And then the company, was called something different back then, Neo Technology, and I kind of refused to rename the company, to this because I wanted to separate them and this and that. And then over time, everyone just knew us by Neo4j. So then at that point, we said, hey, let's just go ahead and rename the company Neo4j.
This is how we're known. That's
the story of that. And for a later day, I saw there was some comments in the chat before about Cypher and stuff like that. We'll do the story of the naming of Cypher.
Maybe we'll have an entire session just on naming within the Neo4j
exactly.
universe. There's a lot of paths we can go down, I think, there. That would be fun. So, and actually, this gets around. So that was the bit of the origin story of Neo4j. This kind of looks forward towards where's all this going. And I love the ambition of this question. This is from Alec Manfre. Do you think graph databases will replace relational databases or even to their market share? Said another way, do you expect a large number of apps to become graph native?
Oh, wow. I love that question. Even kind of the tail end of that, apps become graph native. Yeah. Like with all these questions, there's like a short and a long version of it all. So maybe let's bucket two broad buckets to start with. Existing applications versus new applications, right? And so Neo4j actually and graph databases have actually had to play with existing applications, unlike many new types of databases, right? If you take a Mongo, for example, or maybe like an InfluxDB, like a time series database or something like this, typically you wouldn't say, if I have an existing application, I'm going to add, let's just take Mongo as an example, right? Which, this, I've long been a fan of Mongo, right? People think that there's some kind of, but like I've always really liked Mongo. But like the reason you would use Mongo is developer productivity, agility, stuff like that, right? And if you have an existing application using a relational database and you add Mongo to it, that's not going to give you more developer productivity, because all of a sudden you're dealing with two databases. That's the opposite of developer productivity. Yeah, exactly, right? And so for us, though, if you have an existing application, let's just keep it simple, using a relational database, there's a real value proposition for pulling in Neo4j, right? Because you will have, in that relational database, you might have some connected data. What example did we talk about before? Telcos or utilities or something like this, right? You might have like an application that is operating on your, let's talk about utilities, your utilities network, and who's allowed to access it, who's allowed to do whatever operations on it. Maybe that's stored in a relational database, maybe not, right? But then the network will be stored in a relational database if that's where the application started. But that's a really poor fit with a relational database. So really it will be trapped, that network data structure will be trapped in a relational database. If you then inject Neo4j into that and run them side by side, you can take and you can replicate the network overlay, like how the utilities are connected, into Neo4j. And that's actually really powerful, because all of a sudden you can do queries on this that are much, much faster, of course, than you can do with joins in a relational database. So that's kind of the first bucket, existing applications, right, that are already using a relational database, right? We have a play there. I don't think that's the big one, right?
It's interesting, though, because it's a nice way in.
Exactly.
It's a fantastic complement to what you already have. Arguably, it's almost like, oh, you've got a relational database, you want to add search, you'll grab Elasticsearch, mix it in.
Exactly.
You've got an existing database, but you want to add how is it structured? How are things actually connected? Deeper insight into the data. Add a graph into the mix.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, okay.
So that's that bucket. The other bucket that I think is more interesting is greenfield projects. And I guess the question was framed as, hey, will it, kill the relational database over time?
Take over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that type of a thing. I am massively long on graph databases over time becoming the first database that developers reach for. And so First does not mean the only, right? I still believe that in any non-trivial application, there's going to be multiple database backends, not 5 or 10, but like 2 or 3, you know, type of like a low kind of single-digit number type of databases, right? So I believe that in that future, but there's one that's going to be the first one you reach for when you sit down and you start prototyping your application.
Right.
I think Neo4j has the potential to become that over time, right? Because most applications will become more and more connected over time, because the world is becoming more connected over time, and data models the world. So that's going to happen. And then as we release by release by release, improve the developer experience, reduce the friction between what's in the head of the developer, the cognitive model of the developer, and how they actually express that in their data, right? As we do that release by release, it's going to be easier for them to reach for Neo4j over time to build that new application. Right. And I think that's over time how we would, like the graph world would eat into the market share of the relational database.
So no sailboat yet.
No sailboat yet.
Okay.
Not quite there.
Larry's safe for now. All right. Let's see. We've got, I think, time for probably just one more question. Oh, and this is the same, you know, sort of in the same lines. Let's see. We could either go here to what do you see for Neo4j and graph databases in the next 5-10 years?
I feel like I can.
It's kind of in the same area.
Yeah,
right?
I can answer that.
Let's see if we can diverge here a little bit. On this, maybe a lot of this is about like how relational fits in with graph, which is fantastic. This maybe we go to oh, what's been upvoted.
Maybe we just sit here and watch you
we
scroll.
Can just watch you scroll. You know, great TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Is just
this is live on your screen right now.
So the variation on this is actually, so one of the biggest challenges with, you know, that growth and with that dominance. So like this is from Mike Morley here. Mike asks, what do you see as the biggest barriers to Neo4j being adopted as the database and machine learning platform? So, okay, let's say we have the ambition. Let's say we do want to take over the world. Yeah. What's the biggest challenge right now? Like what's stopping us? Yeah. Sometimes you call it the graph problem. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The graph problem. That's an interesting one to unpack. How are we doing on time? How much more time?
We've got a few minutes. So
a few minutes. Yeah. So the short version.
Pithy.
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge for us here in the graph world and for Neo4j to become increasingly more adopted is it's the mismatch between the number of applications, the number of use cases for which graph databases in Neo4j is the best fit, the mismatch between that and the perception thereof. So in other words, there's a wide variety of applications that really is very graphy in nature, but people don't think of them that way. Right? For those of you who are watching this in a browser, which I guess is all of you, like pull up a separate tab, go to images.google.com, type in domain model. Just do that right now. Hit enter, and then you scroll down, images.google.com, domain model. You just keep scrolling. What you'll see there is a bunch of domain models from applications. Every single one of them is a graph, right? Most of them are a great fit for Neo4j, but the perception out there amongst other developers, not the folks on this call, right? You get it, but amongst most developers is, you know what? Hey, graphs are kind of niche. It's good for XYZ, digital twin, personalization, fraud detection, handful of use cases is what people know. And the mismatch between that and the reality, I think that's the biggest barrier. And it's a big thing that all of you here on this call can help out with, which is spread the word about the breadth of applicability, the breadth of use cases for graph databases.
We talk sometimes about like people having a graph epiphany. And the moment that happens, exactly what you're talking about, the script flips. And it's like, okay, I've got graph problems everywhere. Like, oh, I can use a graph for this. I can use a graph for that. And like, it suddenly becomes pervasive in everything you do and how you even think about things, whether it's a database project or not. It's like the thinking carries forward with you. And
That's exactly right.
Exactly. Like everybody here, like you're all part of like this future of like building the graph community. You are the graph community. Everybody that you know, we know from Nicholas's talk in the morning, all of your friends, who apparently you all have more friends than I do, because because you're my friend, right? And more than you, I don't know how that works. The math was very intimidating, to be honest. That's how all this spreads. That's how the growth maybe actually is unlocked.
That's right. Well said.
Cool. Thank you all for the session. This has been fantastic.